Hey guys, welcome to the Liberal Hive Mind, a channel solely focused on exposing the abundant hypocrisy of the left. And of course, here's your meme of the day, brought to you by 5mind.com. You know, it feels like the theme of the year has been nothing but scams, rackets, and fraud. Ever since the Doge initiative and frankly the Trump mandate started on the 20th of January this year, it's been nothing but bombshell after bombshell of Democrat fraud, massive NGO scams, the list goes on and on and on. And some people, you know, they seem surprised. Oh, it's shocking, especially the scale of some of these massive fraud schemes. We're talking billions of frickin' dollars. It's certainly not a petty crime like stealing out of a tip jar. No, we're talking big institutional levels of fraud. And of course, for so many people, it's shocking, but for me, and I think for many of us, it's the least shocking thing we've heard all year. Democrat governance and massive fraud go together like peanut butter and frickin' jelly. And obviously, there's a pattern here. Every time you get one of these bloated blue state bureaucracies, well, all you gotta do is simply scratch the surface a little bit, and you get a full-on window into waste, fraud, and abuse. Bureaucratic bloat skimming off the top, money laundering, embezzlement. And yet, seriously, in 2025, we got people looking at this stuff going, oh, well, who would have known? No, it could have happened anywhere. But the truth is, no, it couldn't. This only happens in big, bloated, public bureaucracies. It's the worst environment for corruption. And once again, we're getting a glimpse into that corruption, as it seems we now have a Minnesota DHS whistleblower, or alleged whistleblower. He's claiming to be a whistleblower. And this individual is pointing the finger directly at Tim Walz' fat frickin' face. Let me show you guys this very interesting development. We got some stuff to get into, so let's roll the tape. All right, folks, so we've supposedly got this new statement coming from inside Tim Walz' Minnesota machine. We have the official Minnesota DHS account, which is Minnesota DHS. But then there's another handle that popped up recently, which is Minnesota_DHS. And this account is apparently a whistleblower from inside the department who created it. The account has since been suspended, so again, I really don't know the validity of the account, but we got many outlets reporting on this, as this post went viral all over social media. Quote, Tim Walz is 100% responsible for massive fraud in Minnesota. We let Tim Walz know of fraud early on, hoping for a partnership in stopping fraud, but no, we got the opposite response. Tim Walz systematically retaliated against whistleblowers using monitoring, threats, repression, and did his best to discredit fraud reports. Instead of partnership, we got the full weight of retaliation by Tim Walz, certain DFL members, and in different mainstream media. It's scary, isolating, and left us wondering who we can turn to. In addition to retaliating against whistleblowers, Tim Walz disempowered the Office of the Legislative Auditor, allowing agencies to disregard their audit findings and guidance. Media and politicians supporting Tim Walz or the DFL agenda attacked whistleblowers who were trying to raise red flags on fraudulent activities. This is a cascade of systemic failures, all leading up to Tim Walz. Agency leaders appointed by Tim Walz willfully disregarded rules and laws to keep fraud reports quiet, even to the extent of threatening families of whistleblowers. These same leaders are not qualified for their jobs, instead getting leadership positions via Tim Walz's friendship, so state government were left floundering. DFL lawmakers refused to acknowledge fraud and deflected any serious conversation to stop fraud. Biased mainstream media such as WCCO and NPR showed absolutely no interest in covering fraud happening in our own state. Programs, especially in behavioral health and disability services, were built without any rail guards against fraud, all in an attempt to extract more funding from the legislature and of course the federal government. And so holy crap, if this is a real whistleblower, Tim Walz is absolutely screwed. I mean, this is some seriously damning stuff. Apparently, he knew. He was warned on multiple occasions, and instead of acting on it, he was retaliating against the people who were identifying the fraud. And you know, it really begs the question of Tim Walz and his whole I don't even own a stock portfolio persona. You know, me personally, I never trust people who virtue signal in such overt manners like that. Chances are it's an act, and he's got some frickin' private account in the Cayman Islands. I mean, Tim Walz may very well be the Vladimir frickin' Putin of Minnesota with a massive unknown corrupt fortune that he's secretly sitting on. But basically, Tim Walz gets in office, fraud spikes up like crazy, you got all kinds of whistleblowers who were pointing at the fraud, and he stifled the investigation. And that, of course, just as the news of the fraud itself, it really isn't surprising, because this is what seems to happen under Democrat rule every single time, and not just Democrat rule, but big government left-wing bureaucrats. This is what happens in every public institution. You've got a giant taxpayer money pipeline that's just spewing cash into the system being spent in all these programs, and in many cases there's no oversight. And so you get people who walk in these positions and they say, hey, might as well skim a little off the top, why not? This is the the problem with public institutions. It's the same thing every time. It's the problem with big government and big bureaucracy. It creates very, very hard to ignore incentives for fraud. When you build these huge complex systems, these massive rivers of cash, you build the perfect environment for grifters. Ooh, look at me. I'm a man of the peoples. Look at my trucker hat. I drive a Ford F-150 from 1992. I don't even own a single stock. You get elected and all of a sudden he's Scrooge McFrickin' Duck. When you have a political movement, a political party in this case, that is ideologically committed to bigger government, more programs, more spending, and less scrutiny in the name of equity and compassion, weaponizing every fluffy term imaginable to cover up the money grabs and power grabs, well then where do you think it's going? Obviously, you have an issue where your problem is now going to be scaling out of control. This is why I'm a big supporter of stuff like a flat tax for this exact reason. A simple system. If everybody pays the exact same percent in tax, unless the economy grows, tax income remains consistent. It essentially creates a hard limiter, a hard constraint on how the state can grow. And then if you mix a flat tax with then some deficit control policies, sometimes going into debt if you're investing in the future can actually, work well, infrastructure projects and whatnot. But there should be a cap, there should be guidelines on paying back that deficit. Maybe you can't run a deficit for more than 3 to 5 years, and then you have to pay it back in 10. And if you have a Congress that fails to meet that standard, personally, I think Congress should immediately be dissolved. If you blow past the spending caps, then you immediately trigger mandatory cuts and clawbacks. Not to mention every element of public spending should be transparent to the taxpayer to be audited. Because, well, simply if you don't, the socialist grifters will steal everything. They'll take everything. They'll take control of everything. It's the same cycle. Corruption, expansion of state, more money, more leeches, repeat. Eventually, it leads to communism and authoritarianism, the loss of rights, Big Brother. And so once again, we're met with a massive warning flare. Look at what's happening in Minnesota. Look at what's happening in California. Look, just in the last however many weeks, however many months, how many cases of Democrat embezzlement, fraud, abuse we've seen. It's freaking endless. And Tim Walz is the latest warning sign. This is why I have this fundamental belief that the left cannot be allowed to win. We're going through the same pattern in history where they try to take more and more and more, and you have to keep pushing them back. Otherwise, you lose everything. Their entire agenda, because it's all connected. The immigration fraud, the population replacement, the whole frickin' thing, their voting scams, all of it has to be completely and utterly dismantled and thwarted. Because if you give them an inch, they will take a mile, and once they've secured that mile, they control indefinitely. Once everybody works for the government, once it's all union power, there's no going back. And I can't think of anything more antithetical to the American way of life. Anyways, that's pretty much what I got for you guys. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.